Hi folks, I'm Mike and I hope you're well. Welcome to Fix My Mix. Where are we? Number 27. Oh my Lord. Nice to see you here in the chat, folks. I'll say hello to you in a moment. And I want to say a big thank you to DistroKid, who, as Pete John says, they keep the lights on around here. Just in case you don't know, these shows are demonetized. Almost every week, actually. Pretty much every single show gets demonetized by YouTube because there's also always some copyrighted material on there. So thank you to DistroKid for funding this show. We can do it every week. And as I say, keep the lights on around here. We are here today. This is a really, I know I keep saying there's special editions of Fix My Mix, but this is a special edition because as you know, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been doing some hands-on, yes, and that's been very interesting and very frightening at the same time, and that has meant that I haven't had any guests on the show, right? That was just too much multitasking for me, but this week we have a kind of a hybrid because I am doing some hands-on mixing of acoustic guitar from my track, but I have a guest. Somebody who can be here to tell me what I'm doing wrong and how they would do it like that. They do it differently because that's what guitarists do. To each other's faces, they're like teenage girls. They're like, oh, wonderful. And then behind the scenes, they're like, oh, I was doing that years ago. I wouldn't play it like that. But anyway. Enough about that. Let's say hi to my fellow guitarist who is here, a very popular person on my channel. People are often saying how much they like having him on the show, and his name is Dan, and he is the Lonely Rocker.
Guitar players will give you that look, and they'll act like they know what they're talking about, but they don't have a clue. You just got to look stoic, and you didn't take the grommet and put in 3 degrees off center.
Guitarists always stand right at the back at gigs, don't they? And they've got their arms folded. And
it's the lean. It's the lean.
The lean, yes.
I lean these days just because I'm a little top heavy, but that's about it.
you know when you're making like YouTube videos and things like that, right? And you haven't got your audience in front of you. So sometimes they say, just imagine your audience. Don't ever imagine other guitar players when you're playing guitar on YouTube. Don't do that. No, just imagine it's your mum or something.
One of my best friend, we used to go to shows, and I'd always be like, looking and picking things apart. He's like, "Can't you just enjoy the show? You got to critique everything."
That's so true. That's true. But anyway, you can do that today, Dan, because I am going to be later on looking or sort of going through how I process acoustic guitar, and there's almost always acoustic guitar on every single one of my tracks. And over the years, I've kind of developed my way of doing things, and I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, well, do other people do it like this? I'm not really sure. This is how I do it, and this is how, there's been layers to this. There's been gradual things that I've decided over the years have worked for me. So it is really fascinating to have you here as well, because I'm going to invite you to, first of all, ask me questions, or even tell me how you would have done it differently. It's cool, because I think there's more than one way. What's the phrase? To skin a cat, is it?
Something like that. I'm allergic to cats, so I don't.
Who skins cats? I don't know. Let's say hi to some of the people in the chat here. Nice to see Dave here. Welcome to the show, Dave Bops. We have got Kevin in here. Always nice to see Kevin in here. Always makes a great contribution to the show. We have Pete Johns. I've just been watching Pete Johns over on his channel. You were on there a couple of weeks ago, weren't you, Dan? 2 or 3 weeks ago?
Yes, I was. Actually, I had a really good time with that. I have to say, Pete puts on a hell of a show. The guy's a master of the mic, and it was a pleasure to be on.
Isn't he?
Yes, and I do sometimes anonymously slip into his audience just to see what's going on. He did a great interview with Ricky T.
He did
last week.
Yeah,
that was a wonderful interview. So good stuff.
Always good stuff over there. He's usually on the hour before this show every week, so make sure you do check out Studio Live Today with Pete Johns over there. G'day to Doug. Nice to see you here, Doug, as usual, helping out with the comments, as is Keonra. Also, we have E Short Sax. G'day, mate. We were chatting about something yesterday in one of my latest videos. E Short Sax, I think, was saying how he's got all of the Sonable plugins. I did a review on Sonables compressor. Did you see that, Dan? Or, have you
Yes,
seen it?
that's quite a plugin. Some people are saying it's giving Fabfilter a run for its money.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I might actually use it later on in the show. We'll see.
I might ask you about it.
Yeah, it's going. Keanu, did I say hi to Keanu? I'm not sure. But
Yes,
lovely
good.
to see you all here. And the Produce Isle is here. We played a song from the Produce Isle last week on the show, Dan. And what was amazing about it was, first of all, I thought it was a very, very good song and quite a good recording. It had a couple of little tips, but the feedback that Lorraine had got elsewhere for the same song was really, really negative. And it's just really interesting that when two different groups of people listen to a song, they come from different biases and what have you, and different expectations. So, but yeah, I genuinely thought, and I think everyone here thought the song was really great. So thank you for that. Talking about songs, let's have a listen to the first song, or the only song that we're going to be reviewing today, Dan. We haven't got really enough time to go through lots of them. And this is, let me have you read the name out here, of course.
It'll make me put on my glasses, right? Marcello Polly, Now You Will See, as I just did with my glasses.
Now you will see. I just realised, because before I forget this, Marcello, we will play a song in a moment, but I'm going to digress for a moment. I just want to show a wide shot of Dan here, just to look, he's put some effort into his backdrop today. Dan, I'm noticing some nice things there. I didn't realise you use Yamaha monitors, actually. Yeah, nice.
Yes, the only ones I've ever owned, and I bought them because they looked like NS10s, but they're good mid-range.
Are they 5s?
They're 7s.
They're 7s. Well, they look quite small from this view, but yeah, okay, cool.
Next to my massive studio, yeah, they look kind of small.
You've got the acoustic guitar, a Taylor 1 series, you were saying to me.
1 series here, and then this thing above my head right here, this used to be my pedal board. And I kept tripping over my pedal board and realized I didn't need a pedal board. So there's actually, I don't know if you can see the third row here, but all the pedals
I'll have to get rid of
not all my pedals, but I figured when tracking, I don't need, so when tracking, I don't need a pedal board. I just need individual pedals. So there's like generally a boost or an overdrive that are sitting on my amp, which is the other side of the camera here, with the power supply and everything that used to be in the board. But then if I'm feeling a flavor, I could just stand in front of the shelf and, take it off, plug it in, and put it back.
Anyway, we digressed. Let's have a listen. I just digressed. Yeah, we do that. Let's have a listen to this song from Marcello, as I say, called Now You Will See.
To meet me now, what wouldn't he find? And if for a moment you could see what I really feel, how long would it take to feel how crazy I've gone? How long was it before you realized get me now. Now you will see. Now you will see. Now you will see.
Well, that woke me up. Whew.
Yes.
Dan the Man, the Lonely Rocker. What did you make of that?
The best, someone said in the comments, it said they think that it sounded like the drummer mixed this.
I know.
I thought that was funny.
That was Kevin. That was funny.
Yeah, a lot of drums in there. There's no question about that. Well, it's a cool. You know what? I'm developing a bit of a reputation here. Let's start with the positives. It's a cool track. You know, I see someone mention Bowie, that sort of almost spoken word-ish, low register kind of vocal. So definitely has a style, a lot of energy to the track. Something closer to the rock genre, which always makes this Lonely Rocker happy, right? I think there's a lot going on there. So kudos to him for this track, because I think it's pretty cool. Now, in terms of the mix, I think the one word a couple of things. Balance. I think the balance is completely out of whack. I mean, it's there's definitely a lot of drums in there. So I mean, I could say a lot about that. I mean, I was making some notes here. I mean, I think it was obvious the vocals were a little bit too way back in the track. It was getting buried. I mean, the drums were pretty much burying everything. You know, it is an high energy track. I'd like to hear a little thump in the bottom end. I wasn't really feeling the bass. And these headphones tend to be pretty bassy,
a little bit bassy,
and it wasn't. So that tells me that it's probably even worse than what I'm hearing through my headphones. Guitars. I mean, there's some really cool guitars going on them. I'd love to feel some presence, maybe widen them a little bit. You know, I was kind of feeling it sort of not center, but maybe just a little bit off. I'd like to bring them really on the outsides, just bring up those guitars and make them feel a bit fatter and wider. And one thing which is kind of hard to say when we're listening on a stream is that there was something out of whack with the overall dynamics of the song. It's just like maybe there was a compressor on the master bus pushing a little too hard. It felt brittle, but there was just lacking. It was kind of like very constant. You know what I mean? I didn't feel there was a section that sort of a little lighter section somewhere in the middle or the back half of the song, and it still was up there. You know, we could have brought that down in intensity and then brought the listener back up again. Would have been nice. So dynamics in terms of performance, but also, you know, in terms of, you know, as we talk about with compression, it just felt very linear all the way through to me.
Yeah,
a little lacking dynamics. So I'll stop there.
Okay, no, that's pretty good input. A lot of it was what I was about to say. To me, the most obvious thing was that the vocals needed to come up. Definitely, and I like the character of the vocals. As I say, you mentioned Bowie, depending on how people want to pronounce it. There was an element of Lou Reed about that as well. Think all of that. Think Lou Reed, Nick Cave, Leonard Cohen, all that kind of stuff. It's quite a, you know, it's probably a love it or hate it kind of vocal style. But I quite enjoy it. And I just wanted to hear what was being said, you know, with those lyrics. I couldn't hear those lyrics. I could hear a style of vocal, but not much else. So need those to come up. Maybe it's the drums come down. You know, when we talk about balance, don't always think about pushing things up. Sometimes you need to create space for things. But overall, the one thing I will say about the drums, I really like the drums. The drum performance was just awesome and was powering the track very much. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but there was a really unusual kind of chord progression going on, in the sense that I think the verses, or the opening part, whether that was a verse or not, was in a major. I was just looking at this quickly earlier. I think it's in C major or close to it. But then it goes to the chorus, which is like C minor. So, which is a little bit of an unusual thing. You know, people will go to relative minor or something like that. So I had this feeling of being sort of not positive, but on that positive line, and then dropping to this darker sort of feeling, which I really enjoyed. It was just a little bit jarring in a nice way, in a really good way, which was really fun. So kudos on the choice of chords and things going on there as well. But I don't have too much to add really. I think I agree with everything sonically that Dan was talking about.
It reminds me a lot of me, actually, when it's obvious that there's musicianship in here, there's songwriting ability, and like you said, unconventional chord changes, or like instead of going to an obvious relative minor, stay in the same, go from a major to a minor, and just something different. When I started recording more seriously, because my songwriting and my ability to play was at a certain level, and I figured, well, this will translate into a great production and a great mix, because I've been in TV production for years, and I realized how much I didn't know. And it was certainly a slap in the face when I was like, why does this sound like garbage, right? I bought the monitors, I bought the interface, and I was like, all right, we're going to produce a song. And it's like, it shows you that mixing is an art unto itself. And, having some great tracks is half of the equation. If you're doing it yourself, you got to give it the same care that you did to the musician side of you, and just be patient.
Absolutely.
And go through,
because there was some good musicianship on here. You can't underestimate the power of just playing a straight sort of 4/4 really nicely in time, like on the guitar. It's one of those things that, have you ever found, Dan, it should be the easiest thing in the world, and then when you go to record, you realize that, I'm actually pretty sloppy. It was all right when I was in the band years ago in a pub, pumping away, but all of your timing issues get exposed when you come to perform in the studio.
But I stiffen up too.
Yeah,
I have a song called Hindsight I did on my channel maybe last year, and there's like a like an overdub of these chords, and I was playing it, but then I did a couple takes, and by the second take I was like, oh my god, I can't even play this anymore. It's just like keeping that thing going all the time, So,
and especially us guitarists, I'm talking about 6-string guitarists who think to ourselves, bass is so easy, right? There's only 4 strings. You only play normally one at a time, and you start to go, well, there's just this thing where you got to go boom, 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 boom. It's pretty easy to get sloppy with that pretty quickly.
Yes. Well, my influences, so I don't actually think about bass that way. So, speaking of my hand getting sore, I've tried to keep up. I try to play with my fingers on a bass. I mean, I will track with a pick sometimes, but I do try to use my fingers as much as I can, because I just love bass players use fingers. And I don't have the hand strength of a bass player who plays all the time. I can play it, but I get tired really easily. So
it does. Yeah. I tend to, I'm a finger picker on guitar, so I'm not a classical player, but I like to finger pick more than I like to strum. So I tend to naturally kind of try and play the bass guitar like that, rather than like that, which is the way you're supposed to. I end up doing, can't really do it here, but you understand what I mean, between the thumb and the finger.
Yeah.
And once in a while I've stuck with that, because sometimes it works. For me, anyway.
You know what I do? I mean, here's guitar players talking about bass. I mean, and I'm not always looking for a segue to talk about Rush, but Geddy Lee, since we are talking about bass, he's a virtuoso on the bass, but he developed a style later in his career where he was sort of using his finger like a pick. So he would almost do a flamenco thing with one finger, so he could double stroke like that, right?
Yeah.
And I started to do that. It's actually like, instead of doing it like this, like runs like this, I can't do it. But with the one finger, almost like a pick, then I can, and then I get switch between the first finger and the second finger, just to keep some speed going. So
whatever works, I reckon.
That's it.
But there is some reason why certain theories of playing the bass in certain ways came about, because they do work. But anyway, we digress. And that was an interesting track. We are going to get straight into some acoustic guitaring, mixing, so to speak, after we've heard from the sponsor of this show, DistroKid, of course. Yes, I use DistroKid to release my music, folks. Just about everyone I know does, actually, come to think of it. Could I have influenced people? I don't know. Let's have a look and see whether it's worth it. if you do follow the link in the description down below, it's going to take you to a special page on DistroKid with this yellow banner at the top. That banner is letting you know that you're going to get a further 7% discount off your first year if you sign up here. And let's face it, it's already very cheap. If we scroll down, we can see that a year's membership is $19.99 per year for an unlimited number of albums and songs. And so long as it's your own music, there are no extra charges, and you get to keep all of the royalties from the various platforms. Platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, TikTok, Pandora, Amazon, Instagram, Tidal, iHeartRadio, Deezer, and more. Right, now we get to the scary part of the show, Dan, at least for me, because I've got Cakewalk open here and I'm going to start actually looking at some acoustic guitar. I haven't actually prepared for this, to be honest with you. I really haven't, but I shouldn't have to prepare for it because I've mixed acoustic guitar a gazillion times. But I do it slightly differently each time. We'll see how we end up doing it on this occasion.
Well, I'm curious because acoustic is actually not my...
It's not your thing. You're really primarily an electric guitar. So anyway, let's start off by arranging things a little bit here, Dan. Let's see if you can hear what's in this door at the moment, Dan. I'll just play something.
Yep.
You can hear that? We've got a sound check happening there. That's cool. Good stuff. Let's just... Okay, Dan, do not be shy to interrupt, okay? But I doubt that you would be.
We need a solo right here now.
So let's do a quick recap to the folks watching, and do ask questions. Dan can perhaps monitor the chat for me a little bit. If something really significant comes up, then interrupt. That would be helpful, Dan. Just to do a recap, folks, we've got this song, and it starts off with acoustic guitar. You heard it briefly then. This is nothing on it. I absolutely hate this. I mentioned this on the first show when I did this song. This was a very quick recording I did because this song is actually a demo. It's intended to be a demo. Why? I made the demo so I could send it to Ed Thorne so he could record the drums, right? So I wanted to give him something which was representative of how the song was envisaged to come out. But I didn't spend any time, and you can hear some of the vocals from Susie are remarkably off-key, not off-key, a bit pitchy here and there, which, we wouldn't have kept them, but this was just for a demo. So, but the guitar, I don't think sounds very good, but we're going to work with what we've got. Why don't I think it sounds good? Well, I'll tell you why, Dan. I actually recorded this. I'll put Dan up there just to watch his reactions. I recorded this in this studio where I am now. Mm-hmm. And you may have touched upon this, Dan. I've got some room treatment and stuff, which I think is really helpful for my mixing, but it's not necessarily the best place for me to record a guitar. And I don't know if you ever find this. Well, it's a bit different when you're miking up amps and things, but the guitar really responds to the room, and this is not actually a great room to record guitar. Normally, when I properly record it, I go down to what is my theatre room down the hallway. I run a snake down there, and I record in there. And that's because it isn't actually not a perfectly treated room. There's some reflections going on in there, which I don't really want a completely dead room, to be honest with you, when I'm recording acoustic guitar. And that's why I don't like the sound of this guitar, because I know it can sound much better. So, folks, try and get a good sound before you do any processing, right? So better than this. But anyway, we're going to work with what we've got, Dan.
That's actually a good point you made, because I mean, we know my history on my channel, so in terms of like acoustic treatment and things like that, but there's a bit of confusion because we're setting up this room for mixes, but people are also recording in here, right? So I mean, it's not designed to be a tracking room, and we don't want to deaden the room, especially for acoustic guitar. So if you can go somewhere where it's a bit more lively, you can have a close mic, you can have a mic further away to pick up some natural ambience and see what you get, because sometimes you might surprise yourself, right?
Absolutely. So there's something odd going on in the sound of this. To be honest with you, I thought that I was recorded in stereo, and I thought that there was some phase issues on it. That, when you get phase issues, it sounds a bit weak and weird. That's what I thought it was. But I did actually look at it, and the left and right channels are perfectly in phase with each other. So it's not that, but there you go. Now, I mentioned that I've recorded left and right channels, folks. So I've recorded in stereo. Sometimes I record, if you've only got one microphone, it's fine to record just with one microphone. You won't get as wide a spread. You could double track. So if you decide to double track, the first thing I would say is one of the reasons why that stereo miking sort of works well at all is because actually you're getting they're not exactly the same in tone, okay? If you just put them on a spectrum analyzer, each of the microphones would have a slightly different tonal quality, which actually creates the spread. If you do XY miking, you've got the capsules right next to each other, yeah? If they both had exactly the same sound to them, it wouldn't sound like it was in stereo at all. It'd sound like a mono recording. It's the differences that we get which actually make it sound, which spread it out. So if you do double track a mono guitar, and you use the same microphone in the same position, one of the first tips I'm going to give you when you pan them left and right is actually EQ them differently. Give them some different tonal qualities and you'll get a wider sound, okay? But we're not going to be doing that in today's video. We're going to be taking this guitar, which was recorded in stereo, which you probably can't see clearly, but the first two channels that you can see here are the left and right recordings. They're panned hard left and right, and they're going through over onto the right-hand side over here to a bus, okay? And you can see my mouse wiggling around on that bus over there. And that's where we're going to be doing our processing. You could process the left and right channels separately. If you really want to get fiddly with things, you can do that, and that's fine. But I'm just going to do it on the stereo bus, which it's going to today. Okay. The last things I kind of want to mention about this is we're starting at the beginning of the track here. Have a listen. It's just got an intro at the beginning. And then Susie's vocal comes in.
When you're hurting, I'm hurting too.
Okay, so that's that part of the song. Later on, if we move up here.
When you need to weep, I'll be your tear.
We've got a little bit more of the rest of the band coming in. And further on still.
Taking all you can, take it on the chin.
That guitar is there in all of that, the same performance all the way through. If we solo it, we can hear that at the beginning we've got this kind of thing, later on, and later on again. Some slaps going on, okay? So it's a very, very dynamic performance, you know, as we go through. The reason I mention that is because we're going to be focusing on the beginning part. However, because the whole mix changes and evolves, this is a good point or a good example of where we would be using automation in all kinds of ways. Quite potentially automating the EQ on this guitar would be something I'd be doing, because later on, Dan, I mean, at the beginning, it's just there with the vocal, and there's a little bit of clash in frequencies between a vocal and acoustic guitar, but not too much. But later on, especially when we get bass and piano coming in, there's a lot of crossover of frequencies going on, right? And we don't really need the low end of this guitar later on when the bass is there. It's not, and even with some of the piano stuff. So just a point, folks, that we're going to be working on this part, the beginning of the song, but the requirements would change throughout the song, and that's why automation, which we'll be talking about in a future episode, is so important. Anything
would you actually automate your EQ? Like if you're going to have
two different
we'll call it a scene shift, right? Or would you edit it and have it on a different track? And then
exactly. Yeah. So there's two different approaches you might make. Definitely. In the past, I used to do on be done on 3 different tracks. Yeah, and that makes it simple and that's straightforward. But these days, for some reason, I prefer to automate it. I don't know why. Maybe I was just a little scared to automate it. But a lot of the plugins that I will use, you know, Fabfilter and all that, are so easy to automate. I just find it keeps the project a bit tidier. If I've just got the one track to deal with and I'm automating it. So it's like whichever way people want to go with that. But the main thing to be aware of is the needs of an instrument like this will change throughout the course of the track. Let's dive in. First thing I always do is get an EQ, and I'll use Fabfilter. It's fine. Doesn't have to be Fabfilter, folks. You don't have to follow the same ones that I'm using. Let's go to this Pro Q3, and I will do a low cut. Ding, like this.
Goodbye.
Reasonably aggressive. All right. Why? Let's play the track. I'm going to just make sure it's soloed. Yeah, it is. Play the track and just have a look down this end of things, folks. I'm just going to put a note up here so I can get this out of the way. Have a look at what's going on this end. So there's a whole bunch of stuff happening down here, but if we put this on the solo mode and we actually listen to these frequencies, can you hear anything, Dan?
No, now I can't.
No, nothing at all. Okay, so I'm soloing all these frequencies down here using Fabfilter, and as I slide this up, let's just see at which point we can start to hear something. Ooh.
No.
Right, some real low rumble there, isn't there, right? So essentially everything below there, and this obviously depends on what monitoring you're using, folks. If you're using a subwoofer and what your headphones are capable of, what your speakers are capable of, everything down here is kind of useless to us, right? So I cut it off. In fact, even there where we can hear a bit, I'll cut that off, okay? Now,
something I should point out here, because you're doing a very steep curve here.
Yeah.
Fabfilter can do that really well, but be forewarned that if you're using some EQs can't handle that steep of a slope.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But Fabfilter is a champ at doing things
it's nice. I mean, and I was sort of exaggerating a little bit there. I probably would go for this kind of curve that I've got here, which is the 30 dB one, and I also might even do this. This is where I'll start to use my ears. Now, what I'm looking to do here is find a point where if I bypass this EQ, I can hear no difference, if that makes any sense, right? So if I've got it up here and I start to bypass it, let me just do that the easiest way I can here. You can hear a difference between the two, right? So I know I've gone too far. So I'll go to a point where I can't hear the difference. Right, now, people may be asking, why on earth are you doing something here which doesn't make any difference to the sound? And I've seen this hotly debated in many forums, folks, because there's some people out there, and I'll let you know, who think this is a complete waste of time. They say, if you can't hear the difference, you're sort of over-engineering it, da-da-da. Why do I use that voice, Dan, when I mimic these? I don't know why. People,
it's a tick. We all have one.
They sound like that. They go, oh, why do you do that?
We just assume they're idiots, I guess.
So the thing is, folks, you can't hear that. You can't hear all that stuff that's going on down here. But some things can hear it. I'm talking a lot about sort of compressors that may be further down the line, for example. They can hear it. Now, if we reverse this whole thing, and I wish I knew how to do that quickly. I don't. Let's just do it this way around. I'll do it the idiot way. Here we go. If we just did this whole thing, so we've just done a reverse here. So we're only listening to that, yeah? We can't hear anything. I've cut all the top end out. I've cut all the bits we can hear normally out. And it's not making any difference. You can see the meters on the channel. It's not actually triggering anything at all. If I turned it up really loud, you could. I'm not going to do that in case I accidentally. But what happens is I reckon over the course of a whole project, when you've got lots and lots of low-end information coming from many, many channels, it does build up, and things like bus compressors especially, they're going to be hit by this, and they're going to be triggered, and they're going to be starting to kick in and actually be doing some compression when you actually don't want them to, okay, if that makes sense. So this is a way of kind of giving you headroom, I suppose, in a way like this. What do you reckon, Dan? Are you with me so far?
I was going to say, I mean, I've touched on this on I did a video about mid-side EQ where the focus of that video was combing out things that you don't need. And you, especially like low-end rumble and small studios, I mean, if you're on HS5s, you're probably not going to hear it anyways, right?
Yeah.
But there's something I call the cumulative effect. right? Where, yeah, you may have a little rumble here, a little rumble there. Well, it's all these sort of low-lying frequencies in the weeds that you don't really notice it. Often is where you're getting a lot of that mud in your mixes. If you can start combing out the stuff that you just don't need, it's all energy, right? Don't waste energy on things that you don't need, whether you can hear it or not. If it doesn't need to be there, just comb it out, because that cumulative effect throughout the mix, you'll find your mixes will start to sound cleaner and more open, because all of that junk has been removed, right?
So I first started doing this a few years ago after watching Graham Cochran on the Recording Revolution talk about this, and I thought, well, I'll start trying this in my mixes. So for all of the forum debates that you see, you don't need to do that, you shouldn't do that, I'm just going to say the proof is in the pudding. I found that once I started doing it, that my mixes improved. They were a little cleaner. There was more separation. There was a lot less muddiness to them. And yeah, I just found that I was more in control of my mixes. So I'm not going to say I studiously go through with every single track in my mix and do this. I don't. But quite a lot of them I do, especially when I start to focus on certain tracks. So this is a bit of a housekeeping measure. By the way, you could just go ahead and do other EQ moves here with this EQ. I don't. This is just me being sort of separation of tasks. I like to just have that there, and then I close it down, and it's gone, and it's just done that little bit of housekeeping for the low end there, even though you may think I'm weird later on when I add in another Pro Q3 EQ. But there are some sensible reasons for doing that, because obviously EQ curves start to affect each other when they're in one EQ plugin. But anyway, probably wouldn't here. Now, the next thing I do, Dan, this may seem a little odd, is I start to think in terms of, if I'd run this through an old console or some old analog equipment, what would I already have got, just in the bag without even thinking about it? Probably some sort of saturation is what you would get. There's two different ways I go on this. Sometimes I use preamp plugins. There's some from Arturia which I really like. And sometimes I like to use tape machine plugins. Now, I say this really cautiously. You don't have to do it this way, but I'm going to chuck in one now. Let's go to tape. I like this one from IK Multimedia. It's from their T-Rex. This one here. First of all, I like to have it in early. I don't know, it's just me being a little pedantic, because this traditionally would be at the beginning of a signal chain, if you know what I mean, if you've been recording to tape and if you're playing back from tape. So look, you probably don't have to have it in that order, whatever sounds best, but I get a little bit pedantic in that way, put it in there. So first of all, the reason I'm doing this is because I know that I'm going to probably do a little bit of work on the low end of this guitar and on the high end, right? I know I'm going to do some EQ moves, and I have just found over time that if I add in, and I'm thinking I want to add a little bit of sparkle on the high end of this guitar. If I add it in with the controls of that you find on a plugin like this, I get that sort of byproduct of saturation, but I get a really natural way of adding this high-end breathiness and some of the low-end that I know that I want to add in. So I've got a mind. So if I wasn't going to make those EQ moves, I may not use this. I could just use a straight saturation plugin of some kind. Maybe that would be fine. But I know I'm going to make these EQ moves, and for me, there's something very natural about the way it happens when you do this. Let me just explain to you. By the way, I should say this plugin is very resource-heavy. And so you may find a different way of doing this if you're on a machine which is a bit doesn't like CPU intensive things. But anyway, I like this one. So let me just, I'm going to play around with this control. I know you can't see it clearly here, but I'm going to add in some high frequencies using this control here in the plugin. Let me take them out. And a bit of low frequency stuff there. Can you hear the difference?
I actually can a little bit.
Just a little bit, right?
Yeah. Well, I think something that people should understand the logic that, I mean, I think the same way, funny enough, when I do this, is that I think in terms of analog signal chain, is that, it's got to hit tape, then it'll go to the channel strip, and then stuff come later. But the thing about using a saturation plugin, or in this case, a tape saturation, now they're not all made equal, but the idea is that they're adding harmonics to the signal, as opposed to lifting a little top end on an EQ. In this case, they're not all created equal, and they don't all do them well. But a good saturation plugin, a good tape plugin, is going to be adding some harmonic content to the track. And those little subtleties make a big difference. Actually,
that's what I'm looking to do. Now, at this stage, I should mention, and we haven't got into in this series so far much in the way of what I do when I'm adding plugins at all. Now, I suspect that this may have added a little bit of volume to things here. I'm just going to bypass it. I think it is. And you just want to be careful of that, folks. You just want to be really careful to do some volume matching so that you don't fool yourself into thinking this just made things sound better. And it just made it sound louder rather than better. Okay. So what I would do, I've got this this little metering plugin on my master bus at the moment. Okay, so just to make sure of that, what I'll do, and this is just a good opportunity to remind folks that they should do this when they add plugins, is I've got it bypassed. I'm just going to take a note. I'm just going to listen to it here, and I'm going to take a note here. So it's peaking at about -18, and its RMS is about -26 here at the moment. Okay, pretty low signal actually, to be honest with you, but there you go. And I'm just going to go to switch it on and see what the difference is. Yeah, so it's adding about 4 dB actually. It's quite a lot. So I'm just going to grab that output there on the plugin and push it down by around about 4 dB there. Okay, so let's listen to it before and after. This is off and on. Yay. So there was no we can't hear a difference in volume there, which is, I don't want to hear a difference in volume, okay? So there's two things there. First of all, folks who are watching, you don't want to fool yourself that you've improved the sound of something. You've just made it louder and you've fooled yourself. And the other thing is as you add 1, 2, 3, 4 plugins, all that gain staging work that you did earlier on is all thrown out the window as your track gets louder and louder with each plugin that you add. So I've done that. Now it is very subtle what's happened there. Let's have a listen again. That's on. So for me, it just feels like it's smoothed things out a little bit. I could still afford a little bit of high frequency there. But I think we can live with it for now. So that's kind of what I do there, Dan, so far. So we do the first stage, which was the low cut. Then I like to add in something which is going to add a little bit of saturation and give me potentially an opportunity to do some sort of fairly subtle EQing, sort of sound shaping. Okay, then let's get rid of that. Then I add in another EQ plugin. I told you I was going to do that, didn't I?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sometimes have 3 EQs on one track.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is where, for me, I'm going to get a little bit more surgical with things. And I almost always do this with acoustic guitar. We have a really weird thing going on, don't we, Dan, with acoustic guitar? I just want to talk about the sound of acoustic guitar a little bit, because it's a bit of a mind fuddle. First of all, whenever you hear someone playing an acoustic guitar, you may be in an auditorium, but if it's someone in your lounge playing acoustic guitar, which sounds lovely, you're 2 meters away from them, 6 feet, 8 feet away from them, whatever you are away from. That's how we hear an acoustic guitar normally. Mm-hmm. But for us as players, we don't hear acoustic guitars like that. We hear them very, very close up. We get very much used to the sound of hearing them like that. and we're holding on to them. We're also feeling the vibration of it on our chest and all that. So our experience of an acoustic guitar is quite different to a listener's perspective. And then when we mic the damn things up, we stick a microphone 6 inches away from them, as if someone had put their ear like that, right?
Yeah.
But, of course, if you put a microphone where, 2 meters away, it would sound awful, because microphones do not hear things in the same way as human ears do. They just don't, right? So we have this battle with acoustic guitar of then trying to make it sound natural again, although we've recorded it from 6 inches away with the microphone, right? So, and again, we're battling against ourselves as well, for me personally, because I've recorded this guitar and, perhaps rehearsed that song for a while and then heard it from a player's perspective, and I don't necessarily want to give a player's perspective to the listener. But anyway, so there's some honky things that go on, especially, which I like to get rid of. There's things that you may not hear from the guitar in the room when you're listening to them, but for some reason the microphone has grabbed certain frequencies and you get a lot of going on. So that's where I start with my surgicalness. Is that a word, surgicalness?
It is now.
It is now, isn't it? Surgitility, I'll call it. Anyway.
Surgicality.
Let's go with surgicality. All right. So I love Fabfilter for this, got to say. Probably I would say to people, if you're going to buy one plugin ever that was going to be useful to you time and time again, it would be this plugin, Pro Q3. It's not cheap either. I've got to say, it's not a cheap plugin, but you'll love it. You just won't want to use other EQs, to be honest with you.
It comes as advertised.
It does.
Not. Yes.
There's so much under the hood with it, but one of the useful features anyway, not that you can't do this in other EQs, but one of the useful features is that little headphone icon there, yeah? Where you can solo certain frequencies. So let's play that guitar and listen to some frequencies. Hear that one there? Oh, it's a bit of a in there. Not a fan of that. So what I like to do is just grab that. I'll make the cue quite a lot. Probably around about there. Let's just find it again. Oh, there's more like the one. Subtle, isn't it? But it's there. I'll grab another one. Be around about here. They'll do. Somewhere like that. I don't like those. I usually find a couple in those areas that I don't like. I know my guitar, so I guess. Now, I want to say you want to be pretty careful here as well. Don't destroy the mid range of your guitar, because that gives it presence. So you don't want to get too scoopy here and take large chunks out. But also don't be afraid. I used to think, Dan, I don't know, I should never do more than 3 dB. It's too much. I should never do 6. I don't know. There was a rule in my head that, it should only be ever so subtle. But I don't know. Sometimes I found myself doing like 9 on some things, and it just sounds right, so
listen, if you're doing it for a reason. If you're pulling it down 2 dB and you still hear it, well, keep going.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I wouldn't get too hung up on certain values or anything like that, but I generally find if I do something big like this, I start to lose more than I want to. If I start to sort of not, so I tend to be in this sort of range. It doesn't matter. But just to give you an idea, what I'm doing there is looking for sort of what I feel are sort of offensive, would you call them resonances kind of things, or just sort of offensive tones in the guitar, which I don't like. And also there often will be something down here sometimes in this region. Again, just be careful with that cue. I don't want to go too far or too little. you can just, even with the most careful of mic placements, and I've done some videos on this, definitely trying to keep away from the sound hole with the microphone and things like that. But even when you're miking up right up at the 12th fret, you can still get a little boominess sometimes, depending on the guitar, depending on the room, depending on the microphone. So I'm just looking to tame that a little bit. That's what I'm doing down there with that one. So
I have a question. For you.
Mm.
Why would you not do this during your first stage EQ?
You could do. You could do that. But my thought about it is if we go back to that first one, say this down here, I just like to keep that separate, and I don't want the second node. I call these nodes. Nobody else calls them nodes. I call them nodes. That will start to affect that one. So that's one. Look, you could do it, as I said earlier. You could do it. But yeah, it's just, for me, it's more of a separation of tasks. So I've started off by getting rid of all that rubbish down there, which I can't hear, but I know is going to affect it. Then I've sort of sweetened the tone here with this plugin. I've just given that little bit of high end I like, especially, and a little bit of low end. I like the nature of it from this plugin. And then this one is where I'm sort of tidying all that up a bit. And like I say, I can get a bit more surgical. So yeah, it doesn't, I guess you could do it. You could do this at the beginning. I'm not sure, though, whether you would undo some of your work when you add the tape plugin. Say you had this before the tape plugin. It's going to come down to swapping them around and see if you can hear a difference, yeah, as well. So let's do that. I can't hear any difference whether I put the the tape or this one first. So yeah. Use your ears for that, I reckon, at the end of the day. And the same somewhat goes with what we're going to talk about in a moment, which is compression, because there's always that debate whether you EQ first and compress after, or vice versa. And there's some good talks in forums about the pros and cons of each approach. And at the end of the day, spend much less time in forums and spend a lot more time just trying it for yourself is my advice. Right?
Or less times on forums and more time watching good YouTube channels.
That's right, exactly. So anyway, that's my. Now sometimes what I do here, if I still haven't got what I want out of the high end, sometimes I will do a high shelf here as well. Let's have a listen. I'm not sure if that's going to work or not. I'm going to leave it there. But sometimes when you add the compressor afterwards and then you start to add what I'm going to add later, delay and reverb and things like that, sometimes I can find that high shelf may be too much, especially on that E string. Can you hear that E string there, Dan? Can get a little bit much sometimes, So what I could do, let's just show you, and this is a really good example of using dynamic EQ. There's some frequencies probably around about here. I'm going to say, where would it be? Around about 4K, I'm guessing, where that E string is got that ding happen, where I could actually then just surgically control that a little bit. So I can leave my shelf in there, but I may bring that down a little bit there. Ding dings. So listen. It's that stuff there. Which can get a bit not so nice. Can get on your nerves a little bit, I find. So I could use a dynamic EQ there just for when, because that it's really when that E string is being played. So I do that in
actually that's a good example of, we're in the intro here where the guitar is kind of on its own, but eventually it's going to be a part of the ensemble, right? The disadvantages of mixing in solo, right? Which, for example, that little plucking on the E string may actually be some nice articulation in the context of the mix.
Very true. Yeah.
As opposed to as a solo instrument where it's a bit much. So that's why if it's part of a full mix, is that when you start to get into those kind of decisions, it's best to do it in context of the mix to really know for sure, right?
Absolutely. And again, this would be something that could be automated. It's really easy to automate these things. You can just switch it off when it comes to that thing. It's easily done. But anyway, so let's have a look at this dynamic EQ on this. I always get confused on this, you know. You can see I'm getting confused. You can see it's happening a little bit there. I probably would fiddle around with that a little bit more, though, to find the frequencies that are offending there. But it's just one of the sort of things that maybe I would control, because I don't necessarily want to lose those frequencies with the rest of the guitar performance. There's a nice airiness in there, but just at particular points, like I say, when the E string kicks in there, then they may become a little bit irritating to me. So anyway, that would be the next thing I do. And after that, well, here's an interesting topic, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
I would go for compression next. That's if I use compression at all, because you don't have to use compression, folks. Here's a headline for you. You don't have to use compression. You should use compression if you think that there's the dynamics in this instrument are out of control, or if you want to cut the peaks so that you can push the RMS, so to speak, up. If you just want to make the whole thing sound louder without actually peaking too high, then you could use compression for that. Or if you like the quality of a particular compressor, you know, particularly talking about emulations of analog compressors, and they may bring something to the party, even if you're not really using them for compression. That's sort of valid. But don't feel like you kind of have to compress a guitar like this, right? Now, if this is in the middle of a much bigger song, a louder song, or more of a rock song or something like that, it's much more likely that you would want to compress it. I often don't compress these type of acoustic guitar performances. I like them to breathe. I like them to be very, very dynamic. But if I were to compress it, then I almost certainly will go for something like an LA2A style compressor. Why? Because it's actually going to be very transparent. You're actually not going to really be aware of it compressing at all. Let's just try and find one here. Oh, let's go universal audio. I've got my Apollo plugged in. Why not? I'll get all elitist on you here. You don't have to use universal audio compressor. What am I looking for here? Let's go this LA2A. Okay. This is a good chance to talk about LA2A. I'm going to be making a video soon about LA2A compressors, and I bet some of you are using them wrong. This is my guess. Let me just try and rearrange this screen again. Okay, so there's a few knobs and buttons on this, but there's going to be a limiter and a compressor. But there's essentially two knobs on an LA2A. One on the left-hand side is marked gain. The one on the right-hand side is peak reduction. Folks, on an LA2A, you're not mucking around with ratios, attack or release or anything like that. There is a fixed ratio. It's not really quite fixed because that actually changes during the depending on what it's receiving. But you're not controlling the ratio, and there's a difference between the ratio. Obviously, the limiter has a much more aggressive ratio than the compressor. Okay, but you've got two knobs: gain and peak. I'm not going to ask Dan here about these controls because I don't want to embarrass him in case he gets the question wrong. But I know another YouTuber friend of ours was doing this wrong.
Okay. Care to give me a hint?
No.
No, we're not embarrassing.
No. So, and it's an easy mistake to make because normally we would have an output gain on the right-hand side, wouldn't we, of an interface, right? But the gain on an LA2A is an output gain. This is the control which is on the left-hand side. This is an output gain, okay? It's just like a volume knob, folks, at the end of the processor, and it's turning it up and down. It's not an input gain, even though it's on the left-hand side. That confused me, I can tell you, for a while. So all of your control, your only control that you're really using is this one, peak reduction. It's the only control you're really ever going to be using to actually compress anything here, okay? So I don't want to go into the technicalities of what it's actually doing, but essentially this one knob is the only knob you need to use on an LA2A compressor. And if you want to do volume matching as we did earlier on, which you should be, then you'll use the gain finally to do that. But in terms of just getting your compression going, just this one knob. The further you turn it up, the more compression you get. Need to turn the volume up a bit here so we can hear it. And I'm literally only getting like about, this is not a strong signal, so I'm getting about 1 dB of compression there, okay? And now I'm just going to quickly volume match that down before we talk about why I would have done that. I'll just go in and out. I'm earballing this rather than using the meter this time, okay? Last time I used it, I'm just definitely earballing it. So, that's all I would do. And you probably can't hear much different, folks, if you're listening at home. I can't hear much difference. But again, this is small incremental stuff. The reason why people like to use things like an LA2A on a guitar and quite often on vocals is because it's pretty transparent. You're kind of not really aware that there's a compressor there. It's not very aggressive at all, but it is just doing a little bit of peak reduction in there, which is just controlling the peaks of the guitar a little bit. That's if you wanted to do it. That's probably what I would normally 8 times out of 10 be doing in terms of compressing. Do you want to jump in and say anything there, Dan?
No, I'm feeling the same way. I mean, that's like compressors like this do confuse people because they're looking for obvious changes, right? And it goes back to what you said at the beginning when you were rolling off bottom frequencies. Like they're just very, very subtle moves that the sum of the parts, as you start to introduce other things, these little moves have a cumulative effect overall, right?
Exactly.
So
I'm glad you've said that. Should we have a listen to the cumulative effect? Should we do that? I'm going to switch all of that signal chain off. Everything we've done there with those 4 plugins. So have a listen to the original. It sounds loud, I reckon. Might have lost a bit too much out of that LA2A. This is the original. Now, it just sounds a bit smoother to me, a bit more refined. It sounded really boxy at the beginning is the main thing I'm hearing there. But I do not like that. I'm going to say right away, I don't like that high shelf I put in there. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to disable that for a moment. Okay, not enjoying that. It's a bit too much for me. Have a listen again. Sorry, this is, let me be clear here. This is with everything off. With everything on. Yeah, I think Kiana's got it right. It just sounds a little bit warmer, okay? It just sounds a little bit more sort of refined to me. That's the first thing I'm doing. That's a lot of work, isn't it, just to get a little bit of improvement? I've got to say that I would have hoped for a little bit better result than that. I would probably work on that quite a lot more under normal circumstances, but being as we're on a live stream, we just have to make do with what we've got. This is the nature of being on a live stream. But there is, these things do add up, and then we've got that one track, and that adds up when you start to do all of this to lots of individual instruments, and gradually you find that things become more refined. It's not everything I'm going to do. Of course, we've got the much more exciting aspects of adding delay and reverb to this in a moment. But first of all, I'm going to take a little bit of a breather, and we're going to quickly go and hear a word from the sponsor, DistroKid. Whew. you want to release your music via DistroKid, there's just a couple of things you need. First of all, the music itself. Here's mine in my DAW Cakewalk, and I'm exporting it to an uncompressed WAV file for best results. Now, the other thing you'll need is some artwork. I just grabbed an old photo which I'd taken on the beach, chucked on some text here, and that's what I call art. Then I went over to DistroKid, and I just have to fill in this extra easy form. It's a no-brainer form. You get helped all the way through with little hints and things. You can't really do anything wrong. You just go ahead and confirm a few things about your music, and then you just have to actually upload the artwork and the song itself, and DistroKid takes care of the rest. It's going to send it out to all of the best platforms so that people can hear and buy your music. Just want to do a shout out to everyone in the chat who's sticking with us. It's only have to be a little bit of a long show. You okay, Dan? Do you need a break or anything like that? You going okay over there?
I'm good. I'll have a drink of water.
Do that. We're gonna go on to the parts where we can really hear a bit more of a difference now. But yeah, I just want to say hi to the people. Lots of people here in the chat today. We've got 46 people watching at the moment, or the 42 gone down. They left during the break. They've all gone to sign up for DistroKid.
There you go. Cha-ching.
But I noticed whilst we do have 40 odd people watching, we've only got 30 something likes. So do make sure you like the stream at the moment, folks. If you're watching, that helps to let more people know they should be coming over and watching. So this guitar does sound a little. It could just do that little bit of polish on the top of it, and I think that happens for me when we start to add a bit of space in there. Kind of is sounding a bit like it's got a microphone 6 inches away from it at the moment. So let's place it in a room a little bit more. And for years and years, I just used to chuck a reverb plug-in on here, and that was it. Made it sound lovely right away. Just like when you go to karaoke and people always have lots and lots of echo on their microphone because it makes you sound nice. Well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that quite away. We're going to get a little bit more refined on that. So if you've been doing that up until now, don't feel bad. We all probably did that, but I'm going to show you a slightly better way of doing it. First of all, pan controls help us to go left and right in the mix. This is the way I like to think about it. And reverb can have the effect of going forward or backwards in the mix. So if you put lots and lots of reverb on something, it can make it start to disappear in the background if the balance between reverb and the dry sound is off. It's just one way of thinking about it. So rather than going straight for a reverb, one of the things that you can do to keep something present, even though it's going to have the sound of a room in there, is to use some delay. Okay, do you do this, Dan? Do you go delay and reverb? Or?
Yeah, I tend to put delays. Reverb is generally my last thing, or I'm busting to them anyway. So
right, yeah, okay,
it'll be the last thing, yeah.
And that's a good point, because we're going to do both of these. We're going to do delay and reverb, but we're going to do them on separate buses, okay? The reason for that is that when we've added this delay effect that we're going to have, I don't want that. If we had this as an insert, it would go from the delay to the reverb, yeah? And the delayed sound would also be fed into the reverb. I don't want that, because I just don't want that effect. I want the dry sound to go to the delay and the dry sound to go to the reverb as separate entities. That's why they're going to be on two separate buses, okay? So I'm going to go ascend here to a new stereo bus, which in Cakewalk here has gone right onto the end. Let me just make sure. I'll call it G delay. G delay. So I'll add in one of my favorite delays. I'm going to go Arturia. It's called Eternity. Let's have this come up over here. It's going to be a bit weird. Let me just see what I've got to begin with on this. See all that? Oh, lots of delay on there. I don't want that at all. What I'm trying to get here, folks, what I'm aiming for here is what is often called a slapback delay, okay? Where we hear only one repeat pretty quickly, okay? So at the moment, we've got lots and lots of repeats there, and it's actually going through some filters and things, which I'm going to switch off here. I'm going to turn off. I'm going to work in milliseconds here. I'm not going to sync this to the tempo, so I'll switch that off. So we're starting off with this, and there's like 5 or 6 delays there. Let's turn them up really long to begin with, and use this feedback control. It's usually called feedback, the number of delays you get. There's about 3 there, so I'll go down to the bottom. Hear that? It's just one There's just one repeat there happening. Okay, that's what I want. So on whatever delay plugin you're using, first aim is to get one repeat. Okay, now I want to get the timing of that delay down really, really low. I've got the left and right channel synced at the moment. I'll just use that for the moment. Bring it down pretty low. Let's see what it's like at around about 12 milliseconds. Bit much, isn't it? Let me just change the mix. I forgot to mention this. Whenever you've got a plugin like this on a bus, and if the plugin has a dry wet mix knob, put it all the way up to wet. Put wet full on, okay? Because you've obviously got your dry signal in your original track, and you can control the volume of the wet signal from your bus, yeah? And the reason my guitar got a lot louder then is because I had that mix almost down to dry. Let's try again. And we're getting this, we can hear it, but it's a very weird, not such a nice effect at the moment. Tell you I'm going to fix that. First of all, before I go any further, I'm going to change this to a pre-send, okay? So it's going from my original channel to the bus as a pre. It's not going to be affected by the fader now. I'm just going to turn the fader all the way down. It's about, the fader's set to about -4 dB at the moment. I'll just remember. I'll turn that all the way down. Now all we can hear is the delay on the bus. All right, that's why we can't hear it at all, because that's all we're hearing is the delay, right? Just the one delay. So now we will start to hear it when I unlink these two channels, the left and the right channel. I'll unlink them, and I'll just start to make them different. I've got the left channel at 9 milliseconds. I've got the right channel at 16. Have a listen. Ooh! Sounds really nice and spread out now, doesn't it? All right.
Daddy's got a new stereo.
That's right. That's it. And it might be a bit much, right? So it's nice, but it's a bit much. Okay, but it's there. Now what I'm going to do is just turn that down a bit on the fader for the bus, right? In fact, let's turn it all the way down. I'll reintroduce my original guitar. So now we're just hearing the original guitar, no delay. Now I'm going to start to blend in that delay. Ooh, about there. Can you hear it? I'll mute it. Without the delay, with the delay. I like that.
Makes your ears go like that.
It does, you go, whoa, oh, it sounds good. And then you go, oh, it sounds nice, right?
Yeah.
Now, that may be a little bit too obvious still. I'm not necessarily looking for something, again, that I can super hear at this point, but I don't know. I could live with that, I reckon. I could live with it. But if I didn't want to make it quite so obvious, I may change the delay times. I could still go a little bit lower there, potentially. The important thing is to keep the left and the right channels different from each other in terms of the delay time here. Very, very important if you want that kind of nice spread. The other way I may blend it in is just to use that fader on the bus, okay? You know, it just depends. Some people might say, well, why not use the send level? You could use the send level on the channel, but be aware that it's not important on this particular plugin. But send is going to change the amount of signal which is sent to a plugin. Let's say we were using this as a compression bus. It may change the behavior of the compressor if we send different levels, right? Whereas the fader on the bus is just changing the volume of the final output of the effect, if that makes any sense at all. It's just something to think about. That's why I would use those things. In this case, probably wouldn't matter whether you use the send or the fader to get the result you want. Okay. So I've got that happening. I'm not too unhappy with that. There is some chance that I may use a bit of a filter on this, because you've got to be very careful with both delay and reverb that you can start to get some build-ups happening in the low to mid end. There are some filters built into this plugin. I don't like the result of them, I have to say, very much. There's some noise which gets introduced that I don't really like. It's not very transparent. So what I might do in this case, is a good example of it, is just before this delay on the bus over here, I'll add in, let's go a Fabfilter Pro Q. just for the sake of it.
Good thing they don't charge per. The good thing they don't charge per instance.
I know. I should put an affiliate link for this in. Right. So let's go to a situation again. Right. You know, I had that as a pre-send, so I can turn that original guitar down. Yeah. Again, I'm just going to get rid of it. All the way down. So we're only hearing the bass at the moment. But it's pretty quiet, by the way. Let's turn it up again for a moment so we can hear it. So here is where I may, again, put in a big old, something like this probably. I'm just going to have it. I'm just going to have that, right? I know it sounds horrible at the moment, but when you bring the original guitar back in, it's adjusting some balances here. Okay, it's just a little less muddy. Let's have a listen. Here's without the filter. With the filter. Slight. It's slight, but it's there. I can just hear that. So, again, this is another one of those things that, although at the moment you may be thinking when you're listening, folks, by the way, moderators, could we just do something about the rubbish in that chat there? I may even do it myself. Let's just block that user. Yeah, lovely stuff. Oh, maybe that's what you're in.
It's like magnets, those.
I know. Every single video I release, bang, 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 so many comments. They never get through, thankfully. Thanks, Mimo. Where was I at before I was rudely interrupted by an adult dating site? So the cumulative effect of making sure you take care of all these little things, folks. So making sure that you're cleaning out, filtering out the rubbish that you don't want in on the delays, the reverbs, that low end thing. On one track like this, you're going to hear a subtle difference, but I can promise you when you take this care and attention over a number of tracks in your whole project, it makes the world of difference to how clean the track sounds, in my opinion. Well, not just in my opinion, I really do think it makes a big difference. But anyway,
it's a matter of fact. I will concur. It makes a big difference.
And finally, we're almost going to do the same kind of thing with some reverb on this. So I'll do another send here, add a new stereo bass. Let's call it G Rev, because I can't be bothered to type the whole word of reverb. That's how lazy I can get sometimes. And I'll add in, I'm going to go Arturia again. It looks like an Arturia advert, doesn't it? But I've mentioned this so many times. It's my absolute favorite reverb. Let's just take a moment to look at the glory of it. We are going to, again, we're going to do the same thing. I like to have this as a pre, so I can have a listen to it in a moment all by itself. Let's turn that delay off for a second, all right? I'm just going to get rid of it for a moment. We'll bypass it for a moment. So let's have a listen to this reverb. Ooh! Got to remember that mix control again there as well. So I'm just putting that all the way up to wet because this is on a bus, folks. So whenever you've got an effect like this on a bus, turn it all the way up so you're only hearing the wet signal on the bus. Have a listen again. Right, there's a big old reverb there. I don't know what hall we're in, the Albert Hall or whatever it is. Don't want to be there with this guitar. That's way too big. But one of the things I'm hearing there, it's just a default thing, is there's some modulation on this reverb, which sounds absolutely disgusting. I'm going to get rid of that. Reset that. So I'm going to the modulation controls on this particular plugin. So we'll get rid of that first of all. All right, now we're in a big room. Let's make it smaller. I just like that effect, don't you? You could play with that all day.
You got to use that.
You got to use that. Right, let me get size right. Still pretty big, but when we blend it in, as I'm going to in a moment, it won't quite sound quite so big. The other thing I'm going to do again is just it's already got a high pass filter switched on here. So rather than use a separate EQ as I did with the delay, I actually like the high pass filter in this plugin. So I'm just going to adjust that. Sorry, I need to make sure that I don't want to hear the original guitar. Let's just have it listen to the reverb. So this is the reverb without the filter on, right? Hear all that low end? It's horrible. If you have that on there, it's just going to make everything sound boomy and yuck. So I'm pushing that up. Experience tells me that that's going to be about right, okay? Now I'm going to go and I'm going to blend the guitar. And so again, I'm just going to push the fader all the way down for the reverb, put the guitar back to where it was, which is about -4 or so. And then I'm just going to blend that reverb in. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a moment, why I've stopped at that level, but we'll turn that delay back on. All of this, everything I've done here is actually about starting points, and the reverb is such a good example of why I'm talking about this. This reverb may just sound lovely. I can listen to that. Oh, it sounds nice, doesn't it? It just sounds nice, right? But that doesn't mean it's going to sound good when all of the other instruments come in, okay? So we've been doing a lot of stuff here all in isolation. And it's not too bad for this because at the beginning of this track, it is just guitar and vocal, okay? But even when I add the vocal in, and that hasn't got any reverb on it at the moment, the vocal, but even when I add that in and that's got reverb and the guitar's got reverb, then we start to get interplay just between those two things. So this level of reverb that I've set here at the moment is a starting point, as I say, but finally when I come to adding other things in, I may be adjusting that. It's not my finishing point. It's just where I'm thinking, it sounds okay like that. So Dan, I it's so important, isn't it? And I know I've heard you talk about this before, and often we hear lots of people say, don't do these things in solo. This is a bit of a different example. It's not in solo as such. It just happens to be the only instrument in the song at this point. But that reverb could be too much later in the song, or it might not be enough. You may not be able to even hear it when the other instruments come in, and you may be thinking, hey, I want to hear a bit of that reverb. But do you have this? Do you have that kind of thing where, especially at the beginning of a mix, you do have to have a starting point, even though you're not going to listen to things in solo. You just want to get some sort of starting point for your tracks.
My process is kind of similar to what you're doing here, because especially as a guitar player, and I've actually talked about this a lot on my channel, is that I need to appease the guitar, but I need to be aware of the whole production, and you kind of have to separate that. So, whether I'm recording acoustic or if I'm recording electric guitar, I actually have a process where the first couple of plugins, I call it, I'm shaping the tone to my ear so it sounds good to me. And that's sort of that starting point that you're talking about. Then I go into context, and then like my last EQ, because I may have 3 EQs, or I'm using I do a pre-EQ, notching out at the beginning, and then I might use a channel strip, where a channel strip brings some of that saturation that as you did with the tape plugin. I generally do it with a channel strip, and I'm still working in solo at that point where I'm getting that starting point. I want the guitar just to, here you go, it sounds good. Now and then once I reach that point where I'm happy, then I go in context, throw on another EQ at that point, and then I'll adjust my reverbs and things like that so they sound right in the mix. So that is that sort of prep it, make it sound good to your ear, then get in and then fit it in.
Exactly. Exactly. Because there's a final process which I can't really show here, which is EQ in terms of, I think the most useful word is to carve out a space for this instrument. So I mentioned earlier on that later on in this particular track, we've got bass, we've got piano, and more vocals, which all of those are going to share some frequencies with this guitar. Now I need to make a decision about which ones I want to have more presence, which ones I want to, stand out more, which are going to be more in the background. But EQ is going to be another. So I could have another EQ on this bus, as well. So worth remembering. By the way, I just want to say quickly in terms of routing as well, once we get a kind of a sound here, I'm talking about a style. This guitar's, got a certain sound to it with this reverb. Another thing you might want to remember, folks, is you might want to take this guitar bus, which I've got here, and the guitar delay and the guitar reverb, and send them all to one bus. So you've got one fader. Because if you start mixing this guitar, the way I've done it here, with the pre-sends, yeah, unfortunately I could mix this guitar and the balance, I could turn the guitar down. Well, I've turned it all the way down, we can still hear its reverb and its delay, yeah? So the balance between the guitar and its effects will go out of balance when I start to mix the guitar just using this fader. Sorry, I haven't got my, I haven't got it up on the screen, which is not very helpful. So, working blind here, folks. So yeah, I know it gets complex with routing, but it's really quite necessary, in my opinion, to now route all of these elements through to one bus, which would be guitar. Okay, especially if you used a pre-fader send, as I have done there. Not so much if you use a post fader, because if you use a post fader send, then when you adjust the volume of that guitar fader, then the effects are going to change in volume as well, because there's less signal being sent to them. And it sort of brings me to a question that I almost put up on the screen there just a moment ago. Trying to find it. Here we go. Do you want to answer this one, Dan? What would be the difference if you kept the reverb at unity? He's talking about the reverb fader, and lowered the send gain instead of working with the reverb's fader.
I mean, different plugins react differently, but often plugins sort of react to the signal, right? So if you are lowering or raising the sends, I think the effect on the reverb would be different, right? At least for me, and it's different with different. Like some plugins are more reactive, right? No, I tend, I kind of do both. It's a hard question. It really depends, right? It's kind of a feel thing in your ears. I mean, when I don't work in Cakewalk. I work in Logic. On the send, I hit Option. It puts it right in the middle, and then like, okay, everything's gangbuster, everything's great. But then as I start to tweak, especially, well, here's the thing: you may be sending multiple instruments to the same bus, so you can send different amounts of signal depending. Let's say you're double duple tracking your guitars, you may want to send. You'll send them all to the same bus, but then you can adjust the send levels of all the different ones, right? So this way you have individual instruments. There's a lot of different reasons why, and at that point that the send itself, or the bus, becomes sort of your master, right? And then each individual instrument that's sent to that bus, their levels are all customized based on what each one of them needs, right?
Yep.
Okay. Question, or did I just meander?
Yeah, you did answer it. I let me get a bit guitarist on you, because I'm just going to try and explain this in a slightly different way. This may confuse people, and it may not. I don't know. It may help you to understand. But imagine the different amplification stages on an amp. I've got a Vox tube amp here, a valve amp, however you want to call it. And the first knob on there is gain, right? Now, what I could do is turn that gain up really loud to overdrive my tubes, right? But I could have the ultimate volume on the amp turned down really low. So I'll get a distorted, overdriven guitar sound, but not very loud in my room with the volume down low, right? Yeah? So in other words, I'm sending a whole bunch of signal to those tubes, and they're getting all warmed up and they're overdriving the signal, but ultimately doesn't have to be loud, right? On the other hand, I could have the gain turned down really low and have a really clean sound. I'm not overdriving the tubes much, but I could turn the volume and have a loud, clean sound. Does that make sense so far, Dan? Well, the same thing would happen, for example, if you had a guitar amp sim on one of these buses. If you sent it a very loud signal from your send, it would have the effect of overdriving that amp sim, and you'd have the same effect, right? Yet you could still have it very quiet in the mix by using the fader on the bus, yeah? However, if you never send a very loud signal, so you have the send down low to the amp sim, it will never overdrive, if it's good amp sim that is. It will never overdrive, and you'll never get the effect of an overdriven guitar. So for that type of effect, especially if that's on a bus, then the send could make quite a big difference, because you're changing the input gain, the input level which is being sent to the effect. Right? But with a plugin like a Reverb, less so, depending on the plugin. Okay, if it was emulating an old analog reverb unit or an old delay unit, which sometimes, they obviously, as we were talking earlier, they might add saturation or some distortion or something like that, then the amount of signal you send to it could make a difference to what's happening with that plugin. Does that make sense, Dan?
Yes, and much like I said, a lot of plugins are designed to react based on
right.
the signal that it's fed. It's kind of the analog logic, where in digital it probably is not necessary. But there's a lot of sort of old school mentality that still survives the deeper we get into digital music, is that plugins are reactive to the signal, and it's that's where they try and create some of the randomness, as opposed to a very linear sounding effect where it's very reactive to the signal. Right. And that's where it keeps it interesting. And, you can find that sweet spot, and different instruments will respond differently. So, yeah. But
now, finally, just to confuse things more, don't forget that we could be sending more than one thing to a bus. So a number of different guitars or a number of different vocals or what have you could be sharing the same reverb. And that's where send becomes a bit more useful as a control for how much reverb you want on any one particular instrument, right? And then your fader on the bus is just going to be controlling the overall output of the sum of all of those things which have been sent to the reverb. Phew! Sound like
it's something, and we've talked about this as we've discussed other DAWs, is that in most DAWs we have unlimited tracks, unlimited buses. We could, like you said, you can bus your bus, you can bus your groups, you can, whatever. In old studios, you couldn't really do that because you had a fixed number of subs and a master. And I think depending on where you are in your learning curve of mixing, you want to be careful not to overload yourself and get too deep into too many tracks, into too many layers of mixing down to buses and buses on buses on buses, because you're going to introduce all sorts of problems. So, I mean, I would always I'm leaning a bit more simpler these days. I'm trying to think like, okay, I don't have any limitations, but I'm manufacturing limitations, because some of the best mixes in the world were mixed on, let's say at most 48 tracks, some even less, with a limited number of buses, and occasionally they had to mix down to fit things in. And some of the greatest sounding records in history, right? As opposed to today, where we have, I got 1,000 tracks in my mix, but where are we going with this, right? So sometimes
Absolutely.
I do try to practice the less is more. The more I learn to mix, the less I try to do, because it just sounds better. I think it just sounds better.
Agree with you. And there's a number of different ways to do things as well when we talk about these buses. Some people, I think it's probably a mistake when I hear people say, I don't use buses at all. Then I think you're probably not getting, especially when it comes to reverbs and things like that. I think it's a bit of a mistake most of the time to have them as inserts. But yeah, you don't need to overdo it. I mean, I use them as organizational things sometimes. They're not really making any difference to the sound whatsoever. It's just a way of kind of grouping things together.
Sure.
But yeah. Wow, what a great show. I've really enjoyed this. It was an hour and a half long. Thank you so much for your time, Dan. It's been really, really much more fun for me, I have to say, to have someone here to kind of bounce off of and talk about the things.
It was very educational, Mike. I have to say, it's just, I mean, you and I, we talk all the time, but to actually watch you work, at least, a little slice, and to see your process, I picked up a couple of things that I'm going to try.
Cool.
Especially bussing delays. I'll bust my reverbs, but I don't often bust my delays. But I like the logic there. That's just one extra step to keep things sort of cleaned up a little bit.
And again, it's not about so much right or wrong, but it's about just understanding the choices. That if you put that delay in as an insert and then you bus your reverb, just remember that delayed signal is also being sent to the reverb. and you may want that and you may not want it, but it's just being aware of the choices and how what's going on and the effects of what's going on. Often cases it could be so subtle you may not notice the difference, but yeah, I like to do it that way now. Cool stuff. I hope you'll come back again, Dan, for another one. Really, I maybe I should have you on the show and you can talk to me about how you process electric guitar, because I'm not an expert on that at all.
I would love to do that. That would be a lot of fun.
Awesome.
I mean, it's right in my wheelhouse. I had to pull out one cliche. There it is.
That would be incredibly useful. Let's tee that up and do it sometimes. I'm sure you're much more knowledgeable on everything electric guitar than me, so I would love for you to do that, folks. Make sure you hit Dan up on social media. He's got a great new Facebook group, which he's had going for a few weeks over there. I haven't got a link for that, but I have got a link to his YouTube channel in the description. Hopefully he's got some links to his Facebook from his YouTube channel. But yeah, been a pleasure to have you, my friend, and we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much to everyone who's been here throughout the show. It's been a great show in terms of activity there in the live chat, some great contributions in there, some nice questions coming up as well. I'm really appreciating that. We will see you next week around about the same time on Fix My Mix. You take good care of yourselves.